In our lives, there are many resources which are very important, many aspects which are important in our lives, which we can call as if they were resources. Resources because they help us to go towards an objective, to obtain something. In that way, they're resources. They're things that we can use in our lives to obtain something. And we try to the best of our capacities to use the resources we have as well as we can to be well. Material resources. I don't know if it doesn't sound good to say also human resources. We have relationships that we have, the way we interact with people helps us to be well, to give and to receive, our own body, and so on, the environment in which we live. And everything we interact with, every resource we have is important. The environment is very important. It's not just a question of the world temperature. It goes well beyond that. Just 1 minute. Let me turn down the volume. It was on too high. It goes well beyond this, beyond just the temperature itself in the world. There are many aspects of the environment which have a direct influence on our lives. From light pollution, magnetic pollution, sound, noise pollution. There are many aspects of the environment which have a very strong influence on us. We have the food that we eat has an enormous influence on us. Lifestyle, which has a big influence on us. Our choices, the things that we do, and so on. There's a part that relates to our body. Where's our body? Our chemical balance, the state of our internal organs. All these things have an influence, right down to our microbiome. We have the influence of the environment, the astrological aspects. There's so many influences. Once I went to my master and to ask him if I could see, to ask him if it was astrologically a good time to go on a journey or not. And he said to me, no, I'm not going to have a look for you, no. L'Aquila, he was a man of very few words. He wasn't there to explain why and wherefore, but he never said anything out of place. He was very concise. And that time he said, I asked him, can you look for me? I said, no. I insisted, and he said, no. I asked him if he knew how to do it, and he said, yeah. I said, well, why wouldn't you do it? He said, no. And then I went on and on, insisting. He said, you've already bought the ticket. Yeah, I said, yes. If it turned out that it was a bad day to travel, would you be prepared to change the ticket? I said, no. So then he said, if I look and it came out that it was a bad day for traveling, the influence on your mind, that fact, would be 1,000 times greater than the astral influences. Therefore, I'm not going to have a look. This is just to say that all the resources we have in our life, the most powerful, absolutely, and the most underrated is our own mind. And it's most underrated because our mind has an enormous potential to cure us and to make us sick, and that we don't recognize this power. Our mind has the power, the capacity to create, but we look elsewhere, outside, to find things. It can give us joy or suffering, but we look outside. The fact is that our mind is the most powerful, potent instrument that we have in our life. A while back, I heard somebody say, wow, I'm happy. And the only thing that changed, he'd just come out of a very strong period of suffering, a very bad period of suffering, constant suffering, and he said, and it was true, he said, I'm well, I'm happy. The only thing that's changed is my mind. The situation is exactly the same. The world around me, the things for which I said I was suffering, they haven't changed. The only thing that's changed is the way I see things, the way I relate to things. I'm really, really well. And with things that before with which there was conflict, now there's harmony. I've changed the perspective, the way I relate to things. And what happens is that, let's imagine we have a very powerful car. This very powerful car, let's say more than a car, let's say a helicopter, on a ship, a boat. Can take us anywhere, but it's not that easy to use. But what happens if I have a very powerful car, but I can't control it? What happens? I drift where it goes, where it takes me. I don't. Let's give another example. This is something that I myself experienced. Let's say when you have a horse, a very powerful horse, but you can't control it. You're not in control. Slowly, what happens? The horse will go where he wants to, not where you want to go. If he smells a certain smell, he'll follow it. If he's hungry, he'll go home. But a very powerful horse, without having it under control, it's counterproductive. To have a super fantastic car and you don't know how to use it, it's not much use. And our mind has a potential, an enormous potential, incredibly big. First of all, it has the capacity. It has the capacity to make us happy or to generate suffering. And that in itself would be enough. Just to say it's a very powerful means. If we look at the world that surrounds us, the things that man has managed to create until now, from medicine to technology, going to the moon, to research into so many things, to write the most beautiful poetry, everything that mankind has managed to do. What has man used for this? Our great body or our great mind? It's our mind. If we were to look, the mind has a capacity, an incredible capacity to be trained. And at the end of the day, what happens? Since we're children, our mind is trained at school, university, master's, PhD, whatever. What happens if we see a scientist? He has a certain way to see things, a certain way to thinking, a certain vision of the world, and who manages to foresee things. He's been trained to do just that. From when he went to school, to the studies he did, and the long path he followed afterwards, all directed towards this. And maybe he doesn't have any remorse for the death of another person. And maybe he's been trained for this. We can train our mind in so many ways. But there's a very fundamental point. To train our mind, one of the most important things is that we have a certain amount of energy. Life takes place in everyday things. When we talk about a process of training, it means that it's not immediate. It means that it's a process where there are interactions and gradual change, little bit after little bit, slow, little piece by little piece, slowly. It's not something immediate. Therefore, if I want to train my mind in a certain direction, I need to keep a certain constancy in that training. Because the training of the body is similar to that of the mind. What happens is that if, for example, if we talk about physical training, let's say competitive Olympic standards, it's said that there's a specific terminology which I can't remember. They explained it to me, but I can't remember, whereby one of the difficulties of an athlete, let's say an athlete is training to run or whatever his discipline is, and every day he tries to do the same distance in a shorter and shorter time. Let's imagine this. Every sport has its objectives. If today he managed to get to 10, and tomorrow he should get to 9.5, every day he should diminish the time until he gets to his maximum capacity performance. Let's say at the time of the Olympics, it must have been terrible for athletes when the Olympics were cancelled and delayed for a whole year. Let's say I train myself. Today I need to get to 10, tomorrow 9.5. But instead tomorrow I have a rest. The next day, after tomorrow, I should get to 9.5. No, it doesn't work that way. I go one step back if I miss a day of training. If I get to 10 and I miss a day, I might just get to 10.5. If I stop for 2 days, I don't have to go 2 steps back, but 4 steps back. If I stop for 3 days, it's as if I have taken 8 steps back. I'm talking about performance. Because when one is training, you cannot allow yourself to stop. You have to continually train. With the mind, what happens is that it's very simple. But there's a point in which when one transcends this state, where one actually arrives at, one manages to attain that state and no longer needs to put effort into it. But in the middle of all this, there are 2 fundamental aspects. Well, let's say 3. One aspect is the vision of the world, our vision of the world. We inevitably influenced by the information that we receive, and whether we like it or not, and we live within a paradigm, whether we like it or not. And therefore, but it is possible to change this paradigm. It's useless to live life thinking, oh, I'm victim of the culture. No, but we can change our world vision and paradigm. And here we have the act of the actions of listening, understanding, interacting, understanding other visions. Then there's a part of behavior. Behavior, how do I physically act or react in my daily life? How do I interact? What are the choices I make in my daily life? How do I walk? How do I sleep? How do I wake up? How I dance? How do I interact in my daily life? Because together with our actions and interactions, there are mental conditionings. With every physical action, there's a thought. And when we materialize a thought, we manifest an emotion in our copy, we are reinforcing that mental state, that way of thinking, that way of reacting. Therefore, in our way of interacting, the more we manage to be consistent in our worldview, the more we manage to take it from a distant concept to something real. So this is part of our training. The third passage, they're parallel, it's not consecutive, is that of meditation. Because in our mind, we have a certain amount of energy. Let's put it into simple words. We have 24 hours a day. Let's imagine that the mind is like a muscle. What happens if I spend more time developing? I train a muscle in a certain way. Well, the muscle will take that form. If I do a certain amount and then I stop completely, there's no point in doing it at all. What's one of the greatest difficulty in all this is that our mind very often is not under our discernment or control. Our mind goes where in, let's say, in inverted commas, where it wants to go. And there it goes around. Well, more than like that, it goes all over the place. Buddha said, Buddha compared our mind as a monkey in a tree. I don't know if you've ever seen this image. Have you ever seen a monkey in a tree? It's always jumping around from one branch to the other. And our mind is jumping from what to what? From our senses, what we hear, objects of attraction, aversion, the past, the future, fears, anxiety. We're there jumping around like a monkey through all these sorts. Can we recognize ourselves in these? Yes. Every now and again, we manage to get hold of this monkey and make it stop. And then we observe our breath, I don't know, recite our mantra. Everybody does it in his own way. But then suddenly the monkey escapes. Then we try and bring the monkey back to hold it still. What happens is that it's really important to be able to embrace our mind and to direct it, to have a certain amount of control of our thoughts and of our own mind. And in order to be able to do this to a good level, let's say, we need, first of all, to have the reins in our hands. And then to be able to say, just stay there, and the mind stays there. The first obstacle for doing this is a so-called mental agitation, Gopa in Tibetan. It's the mind which jumps from an object to an object of attraction or aversion, the past. I hear something, that connects our mind with something else, here and there, and continually we're going all over the place. That's the first obstacle. The second obstacle that we have is called in Tibetan Chingwa, which can be translated as mental torpor. That's the other danger. Because our tendency, when we try to meditate, and that's it's what's considered today, is considered to be a matter of emptying our mind of all these thoughts. When I manage to stop the mind of all these thoughts, it's pleasant, yes. It also gives a sense of peace, but there's the danger. There's a danger of going to the other extreme of mental torpor, to be in a state in which one's there, like this. It's as if we were in the middle of a fog. We're not, where we don't reflect on one thing. No, we don't observe one object. It's kind of we're in a foggy haze. Well, we don't focus on love or whatever. We're simply, it's a state in inverted commas of mental emptying out. It's pleasant. But unfortunately, because it's actually an obstacle. And one can believe that meditation is that's part of the objective. I want to attain this state. The objective of meditation is not necessarily to attain an internal pleasant sensation. Well, if it were that, we could much more easily take certain substances to attain this state, much easier. I've never tried, but I'm sure they work. My experience, our objective is not to have pleasant experiences, but to familiarize ourselves with virtuous states that help us to live well with others, i.e., with patience, love, compassion, with impermanence, the preciousness of this life, the law of karma. To take many awarenesses from a conceptual level to our heart, which help us to live in a peaceful way with us and with others. And the instrument, and meditation is the instrument to help us to do this. But we have to learn how to meditate. We need to learn how to keep our mind directed. At the beginning, as I said before, we have mental agitation. And one of the instruments to avoid this, not to be under its influence, is our own body, is to observe our own body, our breath, to bring the mind to one object. And every time you notice that the mind's going somewhere else, very gently, you bring the mind back to where it should be, without judging what the thought, where it went to, but just simply to bring back the mind. It's similar to training which should have been done before, which regards the mind, the body. And I invite you to do this exercise. It's not meditation. It's preparation for meditation. You sit down in a correct position. I'm not going into details now. I've explained so many times. With back straight, shoulders relaxed, the eyes slightly closed, head slightly bent forward, the point of the tongue on the palate, hands on the knees, or the hand can be on top of the left hand, as I'm doing now. And our objective is that I'm not going to move a millimeter, whatever I'm thinking, and I just stay still. How long can I stay like this? This is an exercise to do on your own. At the beginning, what happens is that it's tiring. Well, you want to start scratching or something itches. And then there's a pain here. But despite all this, you don't react. For example, if I do this with my head, because once you start, it's interesting to observe, you start scratching your head, then your leg, and then your chest. If you start itching, you just stay still and you resist the temptation. And then the interesting thing is that it passes. If there's a pain and you feel that there's a pain, but you don't move the leg, after a while, the pain diminishes and passes. And there's a threshold. When you reach this threshold, that not moving actually becomes pleasant. The state in which we're still becomes physically pleasant. We're not meditating. It's simply training the body for meditation. Because if you're, from the beginning, you're frightened of being sitting, having to sit still, you start having pains here, there. That creates an anxiety for meditation. So first of all, sit down and stay still. And this in itself it's quite an important exercise. It's in inverted commas, doing nothing, to allow yourself to do nothing, let's say. The second phase was one where it sits and one chooses an object where to put one's attention. It can be one's breath, which is the easiest. It can be an external medicine image. It can be an imaginary image. Let's, for example, Buddha's face. It can be part of one's own body, a sensation, and the most classic one is the breath, the sensation at the nostrils, but to bring the brain there and allow it to stay there. And with very gently towards ourselves, when other thoughts arise, we say to ourselves, okay, I don't need this thought, without blocking it, without following it. We just wait till it goes and passes, and then, very gently, we bring the mind back to the object which we're observing. This exercise is an exercise which helps us to develop concentration, to have less. I can tell you at the beginning it can be almost painful because the mind wants to jump around. At the beginning it seems impossible. No, I'll never do it. But what happens is that once the mind goes towards a thought, you don't give it much space. You don't follow it and you don't block it. And very gently you bring the mind back. And gradually the mind gets used to this. And it becomes less tiring until it becomes natural to do this. When this becomes more natural, we've managed to do this, be careful not to go to the other extreme, which is mental torpor, when you don't have many thoughts, but you stay in this kind of foggy state with a foggy mind. But you can see from people's faces this. Well, okay, I can't be sure because you don't know what's going on in other people's minds, but there are some expressions that people make these kind of faces. There's a certain pleasure, but what's lacking is clarity. Then gradually, one manages to maintain this state of concentration. At a certain point, the mind can choose the object to which it directs itself. This is in Lamring. In Lamring, the path to follow, there are various objects, for example, how to rely correctly on the guru. Impermanence, certainty of one's own mortality, the law of karma, the certainty of relationship between cause, effect, and result, interdependence, taking refuge, bodhicitta, gradually from generating equanimity to creating love towards other beings, generating gratitude, love, developing oneself for the benefit of others, until the correct view of reality. But every one of these are trainings that we do. But the base of all this training, what is there? Our capacity to keep the mind still and to direct the mind. And this is a training which is necessary. Unfortunately, in the life that we do, very often we do the opposite training. We're constantly training our mind in mental agitation. And sometimes we have so much mental agitation, we feel the need for the other extreme, mental torpor. Therefore, there is the increased use of substances, and not only, because one tries to arrive to get the state of mental torpor without thoughts. Let's say through drugs to smoke, alcohol to smoke, or watching television thinking of nothing. But there are some things where there was so much anxiety, we actually choose to go towards mental torpor as a relief. We should train ourselves that it should be something that depends on us, not something on external things. Lama Michel once said, if drugs could bring enlightenment, the world would be full of enlightened people, because there is this misunderstanding. Also, there are certain substances which allow the person to have certain experiences, also very positive experiences. The problem is, principally, afterwards, is that one creates a dependency on the substance, and it's a state which cannot be sustained. The initial euphoria or pleasure cannot be sustained by the substance itself, so it doesn't help us to maintain that state. Creating this dependency, it has an awful lot of bad collateral effects. That's not the argument, but the argument today is the quality that we have, that we need to perfect, is that of concentration. It's one of the 6 perfections. Perfections are actually perfections that we must perfect. And one of these is our capacity to concentrate, tingazing in Tibetan, the capacity to keep the mind on an object and leave it there. At the beginning it's really hard, and afterwards it becomes pleasurable. But let me repeat, to do this we must train ourselves. Every day. There are 2 ways of doing this. One way is from one session to another of meditation. Let's say we have a formal training and informal training. The formal training when we take a certain amount of time during the day, and I see in myself and others, for something to exist, it's necessary that there be space for it. And we must create in our minds space, physical space, time, and mental space for this to occur. If we want to have a certain control of the mind, if we want to go in that direction, that is, of course. A physical space is to have a space dedicated to meditation. It's not, it's not like I want to meditate, but where shall I put myself? Well, it can be just a cushion. If you have a big house, it can be a certain place. It can be a certain cushion. It can be a certain cloth that we put down, but that there be a certain place dedicated to meditation. If we have a specific place, even better. Then we need to create mental space and the desire to meditate, because it's important for me. And the third thing, which that may seem very banal, is trivial, is to be able to allocate time to this. Just have an agenda. I don't know if you've noticed the power of having a diary. So it has an enormous power, because if you write it, it has a certain power. I decided to allocate time to this. Otherwise, if we don't dedicate time, it's like, well, what shall I do? I don't know. If I reserve time, I take time during my day, between all the things I have to do, and I choose consciously that during that time, I dedicate myself to that. For example, those who want to have a shower before going to work, they have to get up a little bit earlier. Is that right? If it's essential for me, if it's essential for me to meditate 10 minutes before I go to work, I get up 10 minutes earlier. So people say to me, I've got no time to meditate. And I say, well, what do? You go to work in pajamas, you make time. But we have time to check all the social media that's passed during the night until 7 o'clock in the morning. But to meditate, we don't have time. Time has to be allocated, dedicated, created. And for a certain amount, for a month, let's say, I don't take, and commitments should be taken for a limited time. So let's say for a month, I undertake to meditate for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. But when we see there are practitioners who do long retreats, it's nothing more than allocating time for meditation, which can be 3 years. For 3 years, I'll do 12 hours of meditation a day. And there's a whole program. It's not just something vague and nebulous. But what happens is that in our everyday life, let's leave alone the 3-year retreat. Let's look at our 10-minute retreat, meditation. For some people, it's better in the morning, so some in the evening. The minimum we should do is to sit down and not move, and then to observe the breath, and gradually, and then to observe our breath, and then our mind. We can use techniques such as visualizations, archetypes, positive archetypes, for example, self-healing, but it's important to allocate time. Once we have created physical space, mental space, and time space. And one day, even if I don't want to do it, what do? I do it. There are days in which the experiences of meditation can be works better than other days, and we don't manage to concentrate at all, or I'm half asleep. That's okay. It's not the same every day, but to maintain the commitment, that is absolutely fundamental. Then, there's the other part, which is the period is between the informal meditation, between the formal sessions of meditation, which often for us is, which usually for us lasts longer than the formal sessions of meditation, I imagine. For some people, meditation lasts 20 minutes, and the period in between the next session is a week, if it happens. So it's difficult. It's difficult that somebody can manage to meditate 3 times a day. So how to meditate during the sessions? One of the most important things is to put effort to train ourselves in self-awareness, or rather to observe how I react physically, how I speak, how I interact with what I see, what I hear, to listen with presence, to do everything I do with awareness, with presence, being mentally present. I cook, okay. What am I doing? I'm cutting courgettes. So I cut the courgettes. I'm there. Doesn't mean you have to cut the courgettes really slowly. You just have to be aware. You can do it as quickly as you like, but your mind is there. Because if you do it too slowly, the probability is that the mind will go elsewhere. So you can cut your courgettes quickly if you want. I'm cleaning the bathroom. Okay, I'm cleaning the bathroom. You clean it with the awareness that you're cleaning the bathroom. If you manage to do this, it probably brings more effort than hours of prayer and mantra, thinking about who knows what. Therefore, the important thing is to bring our mind to what we're doing. Because when we do that, we are training our mind to not wander around all over the place. I'm eating. I'm doing something. I see that the mind is going there. I bring it to what I'm doing. I look to have the mental presence. I'm having a shower. I bring my mind out. For example, I like to feel the difference of temperature from when the water hits my head to my feet, and to be every detail of the sensations, to be present, mentally present as well as physically. And this is part of the training. We're directing our mind. We're learning to direct our mind as if we were taking a wild horse, and gradually we train it. We teach the mind until I've actually had experience of having such a harmony with the horse. So you don't even have to keep the reins, hold the reins. It's as if it's almost as if I was communicating directly with the horse, mind to mind. So to turn a corner, I hardly had to do anything, because we were in harmony. It becomes one, and the same thing happens with the mind eventually. That's where we need to get to with our own mind, with our own thoughts. first of all, each one of us has is able to do. It's not that as if some people can do it and others can't. Others can't. One of the greatest examples is this Anguni Lamala, who was an assassin, a terrible. Who killed 999 people, and he tried to kill Buddha. And to cut a long story short, he tried to kill Buddha, didn't succeed, and became his disciple instead. And he managed to reach not only concentration, to overcome his own ignorance, his own obstacles, and to reach nirvana. It's not as if it was easy for him. So, for example, he killed them. In those days, you didn't have machine guns. He had to do it all by hand. So he'd done some very bad deeds. 999 people he killed. So that's just to show that anybody can do it. All of us have the ability, obviously if it's used. One of the important characteristics is if we consider to concentrate. If we consider that it's important to have concentration, control of our mind, and to be able to direct it, to be free from agitation and torpor. If we think these things are important, there are certain conditions that we must create. Because if we try to meditate on one hand and have awareness in other moments, but we don't create minimum of support for this training, it becomes very difficult, this path, because we do two contrary, opposite actions. One is concentration, and one is the attachment at mental stimuli. That really hinders us. So and a piece of advice I'm going to give all of you is let's try to diminish the quantity of sensual stimuli which we have, beginning with the cell phone. I don't know if it's happened to you. I imagine it has. To be at home alone, and not to be able to be one with us, to have the need to turn something on, or the radio, for the news, to watch social media, or put on television. I have to do something that gives me mental stimuli, that gives me information. Not because I'm necessarily interested in something in particular, but because I'm an addiction. I'm addicted to mental stimuli. We have to be careful with this. Okay? Therefore, it's okay using social media. Yeah, it's fine. It's okay to use cell phone. Yes, it's okay to use, see films, whatever. Yes, it's okay, fine. But it's not. Addiction is no good. Dependency and addiction is no good. Addiction is when we have this kind of, how can I say, this impulse towards when there's no need in that moment. When you wake up and there's our hand just has to go towards the cell phone. There's something that's not right here. When we get to the end of the day and you're tired, the most logical thing would be to go to sleep. I know, but what do? We have to stay and watch something. There's something that's not right there. When you don't manage just to be alone with yourself, and you don't find it pleasurable to be with yourself, there's something, and you need to have this kind of addiction to have something externally. There's something that's not right. And this addiction And this is the great interference to meditation. So one of the important things to do is to diminish the number of mental stimuli that we have. Principally that what I see and what I hear, what I listen to. It's not easy. Also because this is a very big part of our culture. And once I found myself at peak in Beijing, it could have been anywhere in the world. I was in a shopping center, a shopping mall, and at some point, we go past a zone full of games for little video games, all sorts of games for little kids and bigger kids. There was everything, all kinds of games. And it was done really well. I said, oh, how nice. Oh, it's done so well. This is like a little area of games within. There's a part with music, with games with movement, with dancing, with others with virtual reality within this area in the commercial, in this shopping mall. And the person who was with me said, poor kids, this violence towards them. And I said, well, why? I imagine if I was a kid, I would love being there. I would have had such a good time. And the person said, she said to me, a child who comes to a place like this and creates a minimum of familiarity with this, and then he goes home and you give him a book. He'll just be thumping it to try and get a reaction for it. So he won't appreciate it at all. But the problem is not that. The problem is that at a certain point, one loses the capacity for creativity and creates a dependency for stimuli. I don't know if you've ever seen a little kid making a scene, having a tantrum because they can't use the cell phone. Have you ever seen this? See how easily they become addicts to cell phones. Very quickly they become addicts, very easily. And obviously, it's an easy solution. Okay, don't need a babysitter here, this will keep you quiet. But the problem is not only that, but the problem is if he doesn't have that in his mind, he makes a huge tantrum. Once a child of a friend of mine was in a supermarket, Mummy, I want this. And the mother said, no, I'm not going to get it for you. And he repeats it, and the mother said no. And she goes on with and he starts crying and crying because he wanted that thing. And the mother said no. And he started shouting to everybody. He started shouting at everybody in the supermarket, help me, help, save the children, call somebody, call the authorities. I don't know where he got this idea from. At a certain point, and the mother had simply said no, and the child was a really good actor. But what happened was that but when you get used to it's very difficult to withdraw mental stimuli after you get used to them. How much are we dependent on these stimuli? How hard is it not to be with them? So the capacity to become addicted is much greater with children, is much greater than it is with us. Kids learn things really quickly, much more quickly than us. Okay, I've gone off. I've gone off the subject. Here there are no kids present, but we have to be very aware and careful with ourselves, even if we're not kids. When we get used to this level of mental stimuli afterwards, if you don't have them, it seems like it's just not nice. we get bored. And we lose ever more the capacity to direct our mind. And therefore, let me invite you to diminish your mental stimuli. I don't want to say you can't see a film or play a game or whatever. But, for example, before I conclude, let me give an example of myself. As a kid, I loved video games. I was crazy about them. I had the attitude, let me take a video game. I play until I can't play anymore, and I was there. I remember as a kid, there were holidays. I was playing day and night, trying to conclude the game. And once I succeeded, I managed not to look at it. Even today, if I take a game, and there's some that are done really well. But even better than those I had as a kid, even though there were some very nice ones when I was a kid. But anyway, apart from that, there were lemmings, which I really liked. But anyway, let's not go into that. The fact is that if I were to take a game today and I started playing, I can assure you, I could be there for hours and hours and hours until I finish it. But I know my weakness. I know that if I let myself get into something, I'll allow myself to be just dragged on. But fortunately, I have the discernment to say this is not good for me. So I don't even start. Because I know if I start after a while, I'll just get sucked in. Otherwise, I've seen for more than one person. This is one of the very few times I saw Lama Michel shout. And he was talking, and at some point, this person was there with his mobile phone, looking his phone, playing something. And Lama Michel, and he stopped. He said, "Okay, you either play or listen to me." And the person said, "No, I'm sorry, let me put it apart." And then a half an hour later, he didn't even realize. He took the phone back. Took the phone. We have to be really careful. We have our weaknesses. We need to protect ourselves from our weaknesses. For example, I'm someone, if you put in front of the television, it could be the most stupid program in the world. You could leave me there 5 hours, come back, and I'd still be there watching this stupid program. Wrong concentration, and not in the good sense. Therefore, I have to protect myself because I know certain things are not good for me. Therefore, it's useless that I start. They're not good for me. They don't. Just leave them there. For example, if there was a day you want to relax, you haven't got energy to do other things, and you watch something, happen to watch something stupid on television, okay, it has its function that moment. But not that it consumes our whole life, takes up our whole life. Once in a while, it's okay if we just want to blob out, let's say. So we make time for meditation. We train ourselves mentally and physically, and gradually we can train our mind, and also we limit our mental stimuli. We increase our concentration in our relationships, at work, in our practice. It's just a very useful thing in all spheres of life to be able to direct your mind.
Drove Munsel Takto Negurchi Kewa Kunto Yanda Lama Dang Dralme Cheki Pela Longchechi Sadan Lamge Yende Rabzone Dorje Change Koban Yurtobesho Nimo Dele Tsendele Nime Kuyan Dele Insen Takto Delekpe Concho Sumke Chingelo Concho Sumke Modrubotsol Concho Sumke Trashisho.
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Buona giornata a tutti.
Have a nice day, everyone. Tashidele.